There is a cloth sack standing in the corner of my cellar, and I can tell you what is in it without opening the string. 22 pounds of dry beans, shelled off 100 feet of row, out behind the corn, in the second week of September, 3 years ago. 3 years. No ice, no cord, no compressor humming in the dark, nothing plugged into anything. That sack has sat through 3 winters and 2 power outages that had half this county eating out of a cooler, and it is still supper whenever Esther decides it is. Now you have heard the thing people say about beans, because it is everywhere this year. More protein than beef. And I am going to spoil it for you in the first minute, because if I do not, you will work it out yourself, and you will be right to be sore about it. A pound of dry beans runs a little over 20% protein by weight. A pound of cooked beef runs about the same, sometimes a bit more. So the claim is true on paper. But look at what is being compared. The beans are dry, the beef is cooked. Put those beans in a pot, and they drink water until they weigh 3 times what they did, and the protein spreads out through all of it. On the plate, spoon for spoon, beef wins, and it is not close. So that is the trick, and now it is out of the way. And what is left is the part that is actually worth 20 minutes of your evening. A pound of beans sits on my shelf. A pound of beef sits in a refrigerator, and it sits there exactly as long as the electric company says it may. That is not a small difference. That is the whole difference, and it is the reason there has been a bean row behind this house since before my grandfather could reach the plow handles. My name is Gideon Riehl. I am 65 years old, Old Order, Lancaster County, and I have planted a row of beans every spring since I was tall enough to walk the string straight. My father did the same, and his father before him, on ground that has never once been asked to feed anybody out of a freezer. I am not going to tell you beans are a miracle. I am going to tell you what 100 feet of them actually gives, what it actually costs, and the 2 things about them that nobody selling you a garden video ever mentions. Because there are 2, and I want you to stay for both. The first is what happens to beans that sit too long in the wrong place. They do not rot, and they do not mold. They turn to stone, and no amount of boiling brings them back. And there is a plain reason for it that took a laboratory to work out, and takes me about a minute to explain. The second is a warning. It is the only warning in this whole video, and it is the sort of thing that puts a family on the floor for an afternoon, and I have yet to hear a single person say it out loud in all this bean talk. Stay with me, and you will have both. First, though, the honest question. If this is so good, where did it go? Because it went. Americans ate about 11 pounds of dry beans a head during the war years, and then it fell, and it kept falling for 30 years straight. Lima beans lost 3/4 of their share. Navy beans, Great Northern, Red Kidney, all of them lost more than half. That is the government's own accounting, not mine. And here is the part that tells you what really happened. Not everything fell. Black beans went up over the same stretch. Peas and lentils went up more, so it was not beans that people quit. It was the dry bean out of a sack, the one that came off somebody's own row and needed a night of soaking and a morning on the stove. What replaced it was a machine in the corner of the kitchen that kept meat cold, and once that machine stood in every house, the reason for the row went quiet. Nobody argued against the bean row. They just stopped needing it, and then they forgot how. The tin finished what the refrigerator started. A can of beans on a shelf in a shop asks nothing of you at all. No night of soaking, no morning on the stove, no row, no shed, no evenings on the porch. And I understand entirely why a woman raising 4 children reached for it. I am not going to stand here and tell that woman she was wrong. What I will say is that the tin quietly took 2 things with it. It took the shelling evenings, which is how the growing of them got taught from one generation to the next, and it took the knowing. A person who has only ever opened a can does not learn what a dry bean does when it sits too long, and does not learn what happens if it never comes to a boil. And both of those are about to matter in this video. Now, the row itself. 100 feet of dry beans gives you 20 to 25 pounds of shelled beans in a normal year. That is not my figure. That comes from the extension services at Utah State and at Missouri, and they have no reason to flatter beans. 22 pounds is what my sack held, so we are right in the middle of it, and that tells you the number is honest. I will give you the number that works against me too, because you will find it anyway. Plant that same 100 feet in green beans, snap beans, the kind you pick young and eat that week, and you will take 30 to 75 pounds off it. 2. 3 times as much weight. That is a real advantage, and I am not going to pretend it away. But you have to eat that weight inside a few days, or can it, or freeze it, and freezing it puts you right back where we started, waiting on the electric. The dry bean gives you less and gives it to you forever. That is the trade, plainly stated, and every family gets to make it for themselves. We plant both for what it is worth. The green row goes in early and feeds us through the summer, and the dry row goes in beside it and feeds us in February. 2 rows, 2 different jobs, and I would not give up either one. But if I had to pick a single row to keep, and some years the ground makes you pick, I would keep the dry. 22 pounds does not sound like a great deal when you say it out loud, so let me turn it into suppers, because that is the only honest way to weigh food. A pound of dry beans, soaked overnight and cooked properly, swells up to something near 6 cups. In this house, that is 2 suppers with enough left over for Esther to do something clever with at noon the next day. So 100 feet of row, 1 row, is somewhere around 40 suppers sitting in a sack. 40 evenings across a winter where the question of what goes on the table is already answered before anybody asks it. That is what the row buys, and I would rather you had it in evenings than in dollars, because evenings are what you actually spend. The planting is nothing special, and I am not going to dress it up. Ground that drains, sun most of the day, seed in after the soil warms, an inch down, a few inches apart, and the rows far enough apart to walk between with a hoe. That last bit is why our garden runs in long, straight strips instead of tidy little squares. And the reason is practical rather than pretty. Somebody walks that row with a hoe once a week all summer, and a square you have to lean across is a square that does not get weeded. The difference between the green row and the dry row is patience, and it is most of the work. With green beans, you start picking in 50, 60 days, and you keep picking. With dry beans, you plant them, and then you leave them alone, all the way through, while the pods fill and fatten, and then go yellow, and then go brown, and then go papery, and the whole plant looks dead and ruined, and like you have wasted a summer's ground. That is when it is right. You want the pods dry enough to rattle when you shake the plant. Then you pull the whole plant, and it comes up easier than you think, and you hang it or lay it somewhere with air moving and a roof over it. Ours go in the wagon shed on old sheets. They finish drying there a week or 2, and you test one with your teeth. If it dents, it is not ready. If it shatters, it is. That is the entire test, and it has not changed in 100 years. A wet September will test you on this, and sooner or later, you will get one. 1996 is the year I remember. Rain into the second week, and the pods going soft on the plant instead of papery. What you do is pull earlier than you want to, and get them under a roof while the pods are leathery rather than crisp, and then give them longer inside, turning them over every few days so the ones at the bottom get air too. What you do not do is leave them out hoping for a dry spell, because a bean that sprouts inside its own pod is finished, and so is one that goes moldy against the ground. I lost about 1/3 of that row and kept the rest, and the rest cooked up the same as any other year. Now let me put money on it, because I know that is what a good many of you came for. Take a grain of protein out of dry pinto beans, and the beans cost you about a penny for it. Take that same grain out of ordinary ground beef, the 85% lean, and it costs about 8 cents. 8 times the money for the same thing. That is not a small edge, and it does not go away. And the ground has been moving under the beef side of it. Ground beef ran $6.31 a pound this past August, and it was up better than 13% on the year before. 13% in 1 year on the cheapest meat in the case. I do not know where that goes next, and neither does anybody else. But I can tell you what dry beans have done over my whole life, and the answer is that they have stayed the cheapest protein a person can put on a table, in good years and in bad ones, and no year has ever changed that ranking. I want to be careful here because this is where these videos usually start lying. Beans will not make you rich. 22 pounds of beans is maybe $60 or $70 of protein if you had to buy the equivalent in meat, and you spent a summer's ground and several evenings to get it. Nobody is retiring on that. What 22 pounds of beans buys is not money. It is the month of February with no bill attached to it and a shelf that does not care whether the line to the house is up. So now, the first of the two things I promised. Beans do not spoil the way you expect. Kept dry and covered, they stay safe to eat for a very long time, longer than most anything else you can grow. What they lose is the ability to soften. Here is what is happening inside, and I had this from people who study it rather than from my own guessing. A bean holds a compound called phytate. The bean also carries its own enzyme that slowly takes that phytate apart, and that goes on quietly for as long as the bean sits, faster when it is warm and damp. As the phytate comes apart, it lets go of calcium and magnesium, and those work their way into the walls of the bean's own cells and lock them together into something heat will not undo. That is the whole business. The bean has not gone bad. The bean has cemented itself shut. You will know it the first time it happens to you, and you will blame yourself, because everybody does. You put the pot on, you give it an hour, then 2, then you go past 3, and the beans are still rattling around in there like gravel, and the water has gone to mud. Nothing is wrong with your stove, and nothing is wrong with your water. Those beans were sat somewhere warm for a year or 2 before you ever got them, and they set. Once they have set, simmering does not reverse it. That is the part that surprises people, which means the storing matters more than the growing, and it costs nothing. Cold, dark, dry. A cellar wall, a north room, the bottom of a cupboard on an outside wall. Away from the stove, away from a sunny window, away from anywhere the air goes damp in August. In an ordinary sack or a jar with a lid, you have got about a year of beans that cook like new. Shut them up properly with the air taken out, the way people put things up for the long haul, and you are talking 10 years and more of good ones. Same bean. All that changed is where it sat. And if you already have a bag of stones in the cupboard, do not throw them out. Soak them a full day instead of a night, and change the water 2 or 3 times while you are at it. Then cook them under pressure rather than in an open pot. That gets a good many of them back. A 1/4 spoon of baking soda in the soak helps as well, though go light, because heavy-handed with the soda, and you will taste it, and the bean goes slippery. Some beans are too far gone, and no trick fetches them, but most are not, and it is worth the day before you give up on a whole bag. Now the warning, and this is the only place in this video where I am going to tell you plainly not to do a thing. Raw beans are not food. Red kidney beans in particular carry a substance in them that will make a grown person very sick, and it does not take a bowlful. 4 or 5 beans, if they are raw or half-cooked, and a few hours later, that person is over a bucket, and then it goes on from the other end for a day. That is the Food and Drug Administration's own figure, 4 or 5 beans, and I mention it so you understand the scale of the thing. This is a matter of eating almost none of it. And here is the part that catches good, careful people. A slow cooker does not fix this. It makes it worse. A slow cooker sits somewhere around 165 degrees, and that substance needs boiling, a true rolling 212, and it needs 10 minutes of it. Held warm but never boiled, the thing actually gets worse rather than better. So a person doing everything right by their own lights, putting dry beans in the crock in the morning with the good vegetables and leaving it all day on low, can lay the family out. The fix takes 10 minutes, and it is the whole of what I am asking. Soak your beans. Pour that water off and do not cook in it. Cover them in fresh water and bring it to a hard boil, the kind you can hear from the next room, and hold it there 10 minutes by the clock. After that, they are safe, and you can put them in the crock, in the oven, in a pot at the back of the stove, and leave them all day and all night if you like. Boil first, then do as you please. That is the whole of the danger and the whole of the cure, right? Now the second thing, and it is the one that keeps this video honest, because everything I have said so far could leave you with a wrong idea. You cannot live on beans, not because they are poor food, but because of what is in them and what is not. Protein comes apart into pieces, and a body needs a certain set of them, and it cannot make some of that set for itself. Beans are generous with one of those pieces, lysine, and short on another, methionine. Grain is the mirror image of that. Corn and wheat carry the methionine and come up short on the lysine. Each one is missing what the other one has too much of. So the bean row in our garden does not stand alone. It stands beside the corn, and it always has. And I never once thought about why until a young fellow from the extension office explained it to me over a fence about 20 years ago. I had assumed it was habit. It turns out to be arithmetic. Every people on this earth that ever lived out of a bean pot arrived at the same arrangement without being told. Beans with corn in Mexico, beans with rice through the islands, beans with bread at this table. Nobody worked it out on paper first. They worked it out by watching which households came through a winter strong, and the ones that came through strong were the ones eating both. I want to say one careful thing about that, because I have heard it overdone. You do not have to get the two on the same plate at the same meal for it to work. That was taught for a while, and it has since been walked back. Beans at noon and bread at supper does the same job. It is about what is in the week, not what is on the fork. I would rather tell you that than have you fussing over a plate. Now the price of the row, and there is one, and anybody who does not name it is selling you something. Dry beans want the whole season. Where a green bean is feeding you in 8 weeks, a dry bean is holding your ground from the last frost of spring to the middle of September, and it will not be rushed. If your growing season is short, or your ground is small enough that every square foot has to earn twice, that is a real cost, and it may be the wrong crop for you. I would rather say that than have you disappointed in October. Then you need somewhere to finish them. Not much, but somewhere with air moving and a roof where they can sit undisturbed for a week or two. A shed, a porch, a spare room with a window cracked. If the only place you have is damp, you will get mold instead of beans and lose the lot. And that is a hard lesson to take at the end of a whole summer. And then there is the shelling, and I will not romance it for you. 22 pounds of beans has to come out of several thousand pods, and it comes out by hand. We do it in the evenings in the last of September, on the porch, a bushel basket between us and a bowl each. Esther and I have shelled beans together for 41 years. Some of those evenings have been the best hours of my year, and some of them have been long, and my hands are sore either way by the end of it. It is 3 or 4 evenings of work. If you have nobody to sit with or no evenings to spare, that is a genuine reason to buy your beans in a sack instead of growing them, and there is no shame in it at all. Which brings me round to what this is really about, and it is not protein, and it is not the $7. Everything else that comes out of that garden is either starch or water. The tomatoes are water, the lettuce is water, the potatoes are starch, and they are good, and they keep a while, but they are still starch. There is exactly one thing you can put in the ground in May and take out in September that gives you protein and then keeps giving it to you a year later, 2 years later, 3, with nothing running and nothing owed to anybody. That is the bean, and that is the whole of why the row is there. I am not against the refrigerator. I want to be plain about that, since folks assume otherwise about us. What I am against is a household where every bit of protein in it depends on a wire coming down the road, and where nobody has thought about that for so long that they no longer know they made a choice. Keep the refrigerator, fill it, but put 20 pounds on a shelf too, where the wire cannot reach it, and you will sleep differently in a February storm. So here is what I want you to do this week, and it is short. If you have beans in the cupboard already, go and feel where they are sitting. Warm cupboard over the stove, sunny shelf, damp corner, move them. Cold, dark, dry, and you have bought yourself years. If they have already gone hard on you, soak them a full day with the water changed and cook them under pressure before you write them off. Whenever you cook dry beans, from any bag, any age, boil them hard in fresh water for 10 minutes before anything else happens to them, and never start them in a slow cooker without that boil. And if you have a garden and a long enough season, put in 1 row of dry beans this coming spring beside whatever green beans you already grow, 100 feet if you have it, less if you do not, and put your corn beside it. Now I would like something from you in the comments, and it is easy. Tell me the one bean your family actually eats, not the one you think you should eat, the one that is genuinely in your cupboard and the state you are in beside it. That is all. I want to see whether the map still holds, whether it is still navy beans up in New England and pintos out west and limes down south, or whether that has all run together in my lifetime. Esther says black beans have taken the whole country, and I say she is wrong, and one of us is about to find out. I read every one of them. Next time, I want to take you out to the corn row, because I have been saying all through this that it stands beside the beans, and there is something about how it is planted that most people have never seen and that I have never heard explained anywhere. 3 things go into the same hill, and the reason is not what you would guess. That is the sack in my cellar and everything in it. 22 pounds, a summer of ground, 3 or 4 evenings on the porch, and February taken care of. Take care of yourselves.